Chapter 15. The company smiled at him softly and Thorin looked down at the ground. I stood by Bilbo's side, proving to the company that I too shared his thoughts and feelings. Thorin looked back up at me and took a step forward. He reached his hand out for mine. Thorin was cut off from what he was about to say by a warg howling in the distance. We had been found. Out of the frying pan. Thorin started. And into the fire. Gandalf finished, run. Instead of running ahead, Thorin grabbed my hand and pulled me with him. We sprinted further away from where we came, towards the end of the cliff. I turned around in time to see a warg jump in front of Bilbo. He unsheathed his sword and jammed it into the beast's head. It fell in front of him and he tried, with great difficulty, to pull his sword from the warg's head. Once he got it out, he started running after us as more wargs and orcs came into view. Up into the trees. All of you. Quickly. Gandalf shouted. I used all my upper body strength to climb into the nearest tree. Its branches acted as a ladder and I kept going until I couldn't go any higher. Thorin sat behind me on the thicker part of the branch and placed both of his hands on my waist, steadying himself and ensuring I would not fall. I looked around to make sure everyone was here and noticed Bilbo had just started his climb. Bilbo, hurry! I screamed at him as the orc pack got closer. Asog, Thorin said from behind mine. I turned round to see where his eyes were focused on and followed his gaze to the largest of the orcs. It had pale skin and deep scars covering its body. I noticed its left arm was missing and had been replaced with a pointed metal spear. I grimaced. He had stabbed himself with a metal pole to replace his arm. Surely he was insane. I looked behind me again at Thorin and watched his face fall. It cannot be, he whispered, his grip on my hips loosening, the pale orc. I looked back down at Asog who pointed to the trees, instructing his pack to start attacking. They jumped at the trees, snapping the branches and creating large gashes in the trunks. They were weakening the trees and even as we climbed higher, the trees had started to topple over. I screamed in fear as the tree I was sitting on started to lean. Thorin tightened his hold, pulling me closer to him as we began to fall backwards. Bilbo? I called out for my brother. Hold on. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least he was safe. The tree leaned some more until we collided with the last tree behind us. The dwarves yelled in terror as they struggled to hold on. I did my best to reposition myself. Thorin helped me carefully get onto a new branch beside the two young dwarves' princelings. As he attempted to climb up beside me he lost his footing and slipped, letting out a shout and holding tightly onto the trunk of the tree. Thorin! I yelled, leaning down and reaching my hand out. I'm fine. He replied, not even attempting to accept my help. Stay put, do not lean too much. Filly! Gandalf yelled from above us, interrupting my chance to protest and try and offer Thorin more help. He threw a flaming pine cone at the dwarf. Filly caught it and threw it at the wards. Gandalf had begun to toss more pine cones to the dwarves and Filly was yelling at those who could to start grabbing more. He lit the one I held out for him and with all my strength I whipped it towards the orcs. As more flaming pine cones fell, we were able to create a wall of fire around us. The dwarves yelled in excitement as the wargs started falling back, but I held back. That was much too easy and I couldn't help but feel this was far from over. Under the weight of our bodies, and the shaking of the branches, the roots of the tree started to give way. The tree fell completely on its side, only holding on to the cliff with some skinny roots. We were literally hanging on by a thread. Gandalf! I heard Dori yell at the wizard. I looked towards the dwarf and watched in horror as his hands slipped. Gandalf quickly reached his staff out and Dori managed to catch on just in time. Looking further down I noticed Nori was clinging onto Dori's legs, making it even harder for the older dwarf to hold on. I held my breath in fear as I looked around at the other dwarves. Some were hanging on broken tree branches, Some were clinging to each other. I was laying flat on the trunk of one of the fallen trees, widely searching for Bilbo and Thorin through the pines. After a few short moments, I found Bilbo, hanging on a fairly sturdy branch. I sighed in relief, looking around for the other guy I was worried about. Thorin was in a stare-off with the pale orc. He had a tight hold on a branch and he was mumbling to himself. I wanted to get his attention, but I knew any sudden movements could cost me my life. Thankfully he too was worried about me and was looking around. He finally locked eyes with me and I saw his shoulders sink in relief. "Stay here," he mouthed to me. "What?" He pushed himself up, until he was standing on the trunk of the fallen tree. He picked up a short branch. He started walking towards the pack, stopping only for a moment to kneel in front of me. "I will put an end to this. Just stay here." He placed his hand on my cheek before continuing down the tree trunk. "Thorin," I called after him. I tried to push myself up, but the branch holding my legs snapped. I screamed and held on tightly. Thorin had broken into a run and unsheathed the sword from his belt. "Thorin, wait." The others called after him, but he paid no mind to them. Asog's face twisted into a smile. He got off his warg and readied his stance. He held his ground as Thorin ran towards him. The orc took a swing at the oncoming dwarf and my heart stopped. Thorin was thrown across the ground and landed with a thud on a rock. He didn't even get a hit in. His sword flew to the side from the force of Asog's hit and he lay motionless beside a boulder. "Thorin!" I screamed, pushing myself fully onto the tree trunk. I was hit with a sudden adrenaline rush, and as Thorin lay on the ground, breathing heavily in pain, I was overcome with newfound strength. Asog's warg slinked over, picked him up and crushed his body with its strong jaws. Thorin gasped and looked over at me. "Thorin!" I breathed in fear. The warg bit down harder and Thorin broke the stare and screamed out in pain again. The warg had thrown Thorin even further away and he landed with another large thud on some branches. I grabbed my sword and walked quickly towards the dwarf, being careful not to fall down the cliffside. "Yn. Don't even think about it. It is too dangerous for you," I heard Gandalf from behind me. I halted. Asog had said something in black speech to another orc and it started closing in on Thorin. He struggled to reach his sword. He was going to die. "I will not let them kill him. Not when we have come this far. I'm sorry, Gandalf, but I will not sit and watch when I am this close to him." "No!" I heard Bilbo scream. I ignored him and sprinted towards the orc. With luck on my side, the orc didn't see or hear me coming and I was able to stab him in the back of his chest. The orc fell to the ground, lifeless. "Yn. Look out!" I heard Bilbo's voice from behind me. I looked up and ducked out of the way just in time as an orc behind me was about to stab me. Bilbo was able to kill him and he ran towards me. I smiled in relief at my brother who had risked his life again to ensure I was safe. I looked over at Thorin who lay practically motionless. "Go to him. I'll hold them off." I would have argued with my brother if it were not for the 6 or 7 other dwarves who had managed to join the fight. I gave him a grateful nod and ran to Thorin, kneeling down beside him. I brushed the hair away from his face and turned his head so he was looking at me. He coughed slightly but smiled once he saw it was me. "Hey there, sunshine," I whispered jokingly. He went to laugh but all that came out was a fit of coughs. "Shhh. It's going to be okay," I whispered, "just stay awake, okay? Stay with me." He reached his hand up and placed it on my cheek. I placed my hand on his like he had done so many times. I leaned into his touch, smiling at him. He smiled back at me before closing his eyes and breathing out softly, his hand going limp. "Thorin?" I shook his shoulders. "Nothing, Thorin." My heart was racing again. Shit. I looked around for someone that could help but everyone had a warg or an orc they were fighting off. I felt the tears brimming my eyes begin to fall. I looked back at the dwarf lord. He looked so sad. There was no peace in his eyes before they shut. Surely Gandalf had a solution. This couldn't be the end, not now. Not yet. Bilbo. I heard Boffer yell. I looked over at my brother who was surrounded by orcs. I went to scream for him. I wanted to help him but would be unable to without letting go of Thorin's hand. He looked over at me with fear in his eyes. Just before the warg could attack, Bilbo was lifted high in the sky by an abnormally large eagle. It was 10 times larger than any I had ever seen before. It was a golden eagle no doubt, but a golden eagle on steroids and crack. I looked around and the eagles were everywhere. Some were picking up dwarves while others flew around and threw orcs and wargs off the cliff. It was amazing. I had never seen anything like it before. Any eagle that flew through the Shire was fairly normal in size. None of this overgrown shit, that's for sure. During my thinking, I hadn't noticed an eagle that had outstretched its claws in order to pick me up. I protested at first, struggling by and trying to stay with Thorin, but finally stopped resisting once another eagle had carefully picked him up with its talons. The eagle flew over the cliff, with me in its grasp, before dropping me off the edge. I screamed as I fell through the sky. What the actual fuck was up with these things? I landed peacefully on the back of another eagle and whispered an apology to it. I needed to keep my mouth shut. I looked around frantically for the eagle that held Thorin. He was a few eagles in front of me, which meant I was able to keep an eye on him. The branch in his arm slowly slipped away and fell towards the ground. I gulped as I looked down. We were a good 10,000 meters in the sky and I could tell you would be dead before you even hit the ground. My grip on the eagle's feathers tightened and I forced myself to look back at the rest of the company. We would be fine. If Gandalf wasn't panicking, then I had no reason to either.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video / gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!